All right, so today, as John spoke about or alluded to, I'll be covering some of the results from our cloud web application firewall testing that we ran. The overall messaging that we can get from today's presentation is basically we were looking with this iteration of the cloud WAF testing to establish a baseline. So we didn't get into all of the complicated things such as like testing API protection. We didn't get super technical with the types of attacks that we ran. We're looking at using attacks that are out there that were readily available and basically establish just where this technology was at this point, get a good feel for that. From the testing, we found that most of the cloud vendors that we tested with their products do not require tuning. And another big thing is that you've got Amazon, Microsoft, and Google entering into the security market in the cloud WAF space. Last point is that there are areas of opportunity for the WAF technology pretty much as a whole to improve on, and we'll get into that in a little bit. First thing, when you're coming out with a new test, you need to start considering what's the workflow, what are the use cases, what's important to enterprises and governments, small business, medium-sized business. How are they using the product? Why are they using the product in the first place? And the reason why WAFs are so important are that they are one of the main breach vectors now. And this is because business has to move fast or you get left behind. And so businesses are constantly trying to update or create new applications, new code, and security is often an afterthought. It's not on the forefront of how they're getting to market. And so once they get that code up and it's publicly usable, now you've got to protect the vulnerabilities that you've put there. So when we were looking at doing this testing, we purposely did not do any customized tuning for the cloud WAFs because we're looking at the two main use cases. A small, medium-sized business not going to have the ability to constantly tune their product, or setting it up in front of an e-commerce site where if you tune the product, you run the risk of breaking millions of dollars of business an hour for a large enterprise. Now, if you do customized tuning, you can always use the information from like pen testing and then plug that back in. And in fact, the results from one vendor show that their basic play is to be like integrated with a SOAR and use like real-time telemetry. But more on that in a little bit. Also, when doing the considerations for the baseline testing, which cloud do we want to go with? Enterprises that we had spoken with and the analysts told us that go with Amazon first. And so we started with Amazon. Now that we've got a sense of where we're going to do the test and how we're going to do the test in terms of just a little bit overview, it's refine the methodology, create the test environment, the simplified test environments there shown on the right. And then the next big thing is we needed to validate all the attacks that we were running. And since we ran over 22,000 attacks, that was a rather time-consuming process. But the essence of, let's say, if we're running an injection attack, make sure that the injection attack results in a bit of sensitive information, perhaps a password getting kicked out by the server once that attack is run. So we'd run all the attacks against the unprotected website that we were using, the e-commerce website, and then make sure that they resulted in something meaningful coming out. Once all those attacks were then validated, we then stood up the WAF in front of the site under test and recorded the results from all those attacks. Went to the vendors from there and then back and forth and publish the findings. So the results overview, we tried to test 10 vendors, and 9 of them were successfully able to test. As some of the other testers know, sometimes things just break with particular vendors for one reason or another. In this case, we had that. We ran multiple test cases, and we ran 22,460 attacks against the 9 vendors that we were able to successfully deploy and test. The resulting scores in terms of what we're looking at was, one, we're looking at security efficacy, and the other was operational efficiency. And so the complete security score was just the average of all of the attacks blocked versus all of the attacks made. We realized that you can go down a long slippery slope in terms of how to weight various attacks. And because we didn't want to get too philosophical in our first run, we just avoided any weighting and kept it to straight up average for the complete security score. With operational efficiency, we looked at various areas that were of importance for incident response team, compliance teams, as well as just being able to set up the product easily, and then gave them a score based from 0 to 3, depending on ease or availability of the different features. And with that, we were looking at a lot of these tested high in terms of just how easy they were to use. So first, the good news, and this is one of the interesting reasons why testing is important to do. We had made some assumptions going into this that we would have a lot of false positives and that we would have issues with layer 7 denial of service attacks. But when we ran these attacks, we were pleasantly surprised to see that that the vendors were actually, as a whole, good at stopping these. In fact, like false positives and layer 7 denial of service attacks were all completely blocked from the ones that we did. The way we did the false positives testing was we simulated web traffic to an e-commerce site, made sure that none of those activities were blocked, and then with the Cloud WAF, with all the bells and whistles turned on for default recommendations, then we ran that traffic again and looked to see if anything of those activities were blocked, and none of them were. The last area was most of the vendors had what we consider to be sufficient logging for an incident response team to use to help track down and recover quickly should there have been a breach. The areas that we found for consistent chance for improvement was HTML injection attacks and the server-side template injection attacks, path transversal attacks, custom web shell attacks, which is basically just a PHP shell. But we saw consistent difficulties with the vendors in these areas. List of the vendors that we tested in this round. Citrix has an asterisk next, because even after working 2 weeks with their support team and all the documentation, we just had to cut our losses and move on. We weren't able to get it set up where it could work in the test harness that we had. And then this is just the summary results, breaking it down by the different vendors. And as you can see, like F5 looks to be designed for having the tuning, and it looks to be more of something where you want services to set it up so that you get the full value out of the solution. So with that, being conscious of time and leaving a little room for questions, we do have the individual reports available on our publication site, free to download should you be curious and want to look at the detailed findings. With that, any questions?